It's wonderful to be here. What a stage, wow. So I'm going to start my talk actually in the way a typical TED Talk starts. This is my parents' house. But it really is my parents' house. It's the house I grew up in, and it's in Bergheim, which is a small village near Stuttgart in the southern part of Germany. Not to be confused, by the way, with Berghain, which is a club in Berlin that some of you might know. So this is Bergheim, and my dad, who's 78 years old, lives there now all by himself, ever since the death of my mother, who passed away 7 years ago. And these are the Hope Houses, as they're called, 2 refugee resettlement centers that the local government decided to build right in front of my parents' house, about 15 meters away, literally, from my dad's kitchen window. He heard about the project when he was in a hospital undergoing cancer treatment. He read about it in a newspaper. And of course, the price of his property dropped significantly once the news broke, and where he once oversaw a beautiful valley, he's now basically looking at the gray of these ready-made houses. So 50 refugees, mostly from Syria, were added to the neighborhood of about 100 residents on that street. My wife, who is from San Francisco, said, it's the most exciting thing that ever happened in Bergheim. And even the local grocery store added hummus to its assortment in an outburst of globalization. My dad actually had never heard of hummus. And so I catch him once in a while as he's staring outside the kitchen window, observing the new neighbors as they go about their lives, ride their bikes, hang up their laundry. And he's still perplexed by this new company that he gained on the last mile of his life. And so far, he hasn't really said hello. He hasn't really walked over to ring the bell, let alone welcome them to his neighborhood. It seems like each side is being coy, and each side is waiting for the other side to make the first move. There is nothing more disruptive than the sudden arrival of a stranger in town, the sudden arrival of the other. Change of scenery. 2 years ago, Google AlphaGo was the first AI that beat the reigning human champion in the game, Go. Now, that was a remarkable feat because Go is 2,500 years old. It's considered to be exponentially more complex than chess. It has more possible combinations than there are atoms in the universe. And there was one move in particular that really stunned the player, Lee Sedol, and the experts worldwide. It was the 37th move in the second game, because it was a move of such erratic beauty, randomness, and deep intuition that it could not have been possibly computed. It was either very human or superhuman. And that was the very moment that Lee Sedol, the player, and the experts worldwide, the moment in which the world realized what they're confronted with. AI is the ultimate other. And we're quick to concede that AI is going to become hyper-intelligence, maybe even super-intelligence, but we're quite confident that it lacks consciousness. Now, the artistic collective Waltz Binaire set out to actually test this assumption, and it created an AI installation called Narcissus that is essentially looking at itself in a mirror and reflecting on, basically just documenting what it sees. And it produced a string of rather trivial, banal sentences, just really basically describing, like a computer sitting on top of a desk. So it failed to pass the mirror test. It did not recognize itself. It is not self-aware. But as my colleague, the journalist Nina Kraschwitz, points out, AI is not the only entity, not the only form of being that is not passing the mirror test. Physical constraints, mental health diseases such as schizophrenia or Alzheimer make some of us unidentifiable to ourselves. And if we deem them self-aware and worthy, then how do we treat nature, animals, objects, machines, AI? If we apply our standards of consciousness, of self-perception, to other forms of life, including AI, don't we create new means of suppression, new us versus them? Now, us versus them seems to be enjoying really a renaissance lately, right? There is a growing tide of xenophobia, nationalism, fascism, racism at the very heart of our society. And there's another divide that is actually potentially amplifying that's looming. That's the automation divide that will separate those of us who will have work from those of us who might be replaced by machines. The useless class, as the historian Yuval Noah Harari calls it. 50% of the human workforce, according to some studies, are expected to be replaced by an AI or by robots over the next 20 years. There are some outlooks that are more moderate, but the bottom line is automation is going to disrupt the very structures of our society. It's going to create new winners and losers, probably more losers than winners. But the danger is not just that we'll be replaced by machines. The bigger danger is that we become machines ourselves, that we surrender to the regime of the quantified self movement and use technology to constantly maximize ourselves and optimize ourselves, including our emotions. Like, the great danger is not that machines will be able to think. The greater danger is that we humans will no longer be able to feel. That we disconnect from ourselves, become strangers to ourselves, that we become others to ourselves. And a decade or so ago, that seemed like a really unlikely scenario because the apostles of the connected age, the internet giants, the digital platforms, they had promised us a better world by making us all more connected. But not just since the Cambridge Analytica scandals have we come to realize that that promise of the connected age came at a very high price. And perhaps the biggest betrayals of the digital platforms was actually that they pretended we live in a world of sameness, of like-mindedness, of universal values that we all share, when in fact, we live in an age of otherness. So we are now disconnected, disillusioned, disenchanted. We've been at a point of such disenchantment before, and that was 200 years ago when the original Romantic movement, remember Lord Byron, Keats, Novalis, the Romantic poets, when they revolted against the regime of the Enlightenment, the grip of practical reason and scientific rationality, because they felt like it was too narrow of a concept to grasp the expansiveness of the human soul. So they espoused virtues such as mystery, transcendence, emotion, subjectivity in response to that. And I believe we're now on the cusp of a new romantic era. We need a new romantic revolution, this time in response to the disenchantment caused by the datafication, the quantification, the automation of everything. This time coming from the heart of business, this time in pursuit of what is truly missing, which is the other. And business, of course, has, since the ancient regimes, been a powerful vehicle to connect us with foreign cultures. Business, through innovation and entrepreneurship, helps us enable, envision, explore foreign worlds. Business, through collaboration, actually forces us to connect and engage with the other. Romance, on the other hand, is the antidote to the cynics who, according to Oscar Wilde, know the price of everything and the value of nothing. Romance is what makes us human in an age of AI and automation. Romance is the ultimate differentiator when everybody else is just chasing efficiencies, maximizing and optimizing. And romance also helps us to produce empathy and imagination to connect with the other. And it's no longer just optional, because as machines take our jobs and do them more efficiently, soon the most important work for us humans will be the kind of work that must be done beautifully rather than efficiently. But how do you do that? And how do you do that in your everyday life? Well, let me propose 3 principles. I call them the rules of enchantment that might help you do so. First, do the unnecessary. And now the clicker just died. Oh, here we go. Do the unnecessary is the first rule. So I once worked at a company that was the result of a merger of a large IT outsourcing firm with 9,000 software developers, mostly based in India, and 1,000 creative types from the West Coast in the US. And to unify these vastly different cultures, we were going to launch a 3rd new brand. And the new brand color, the new brand identity was going to be orange. Now, as we were going through the launch plan, we decided last minute to cut the purchase of 10,000 orange balloons, which we had meant to distribute to staff worldwide, because they just seemed cute, unnecessary, not mission critical, as one of our executives pointed out. So we cut them. And we didn't know back then that our decision to cut the purchase of these 10,000 orange balloons marked the beginning of the end, that these two organizations would never become one, and sure enough, the merger eventually failed. Now, was it because there weren't any orange balloons? No, of course not entirely. But the kill the orange balloons mentality permeated everything else. You might not always realize it, but when you cut the unnecessary, you cut everything. To lead with beauty romantically means to rise above what is merely necessary. It means to do more than is merely necessary. So do not kill your orange balloons. Rule number 2, create intimacy. I once came across a study not too long ago, last year, that said that the average American has only one close friend. And before we make fun of the lack of social capital in the US, I'm half American myself, it's an easy thing to do, I guess. The numbers are not that different in Europe. UK has appointed a minister of loneliness, and experts speak of an age of social isolation and a loneliness epidemic. And that is quite astonishing, isn't it? I mean, given the fact that we've been never more connected, never more communicative than in this point in history. We check our smartphones 80 times per day on average. Some of you may have checked it since I began speaking. Some of us go to the restroom just to check their emails. But we are lonelier than before. Why? The author Richard Bach has an explanation. He says the opposite of loneliness is not togetherness. It's not about being connected. It's intimacy. And we are in dire need for more intimacy in these digital times. How do we create it at our workplaces? And who can we learn from? Artists. Artists are experts in crafting intimacy. Take the performance artist Marina Abramović, who held a show at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City a few years ago called The Artist is Present. And that's exactly what she was. For 700 hours, she sat there, 5 minutes each per visitor, vis-a-vis, silently enduring each other's gaze, celebrating the kind of time that is thick rather than lean and efficient. And that notion of thick time, of thick presence, is entering the business mainstream as well. For one, in the form of mindfulness initiatives. SAP, the software company, has a head of mindfulness now. Daimler, the car maker, has begun to start meetings with a silent minute. And some companies have taken it even further and are hosting silent dinners. So I had the pleasure of actually taking part in one a few months ago, hosted in Berlin. And I have to say, I have experienced a lot of strange things in my career, but spending 90 minutes in silence at dinner with 30 German business executives was incredibly awkward. But it was also beautiful, because no one said a word, everybody was present, I liked everybody in the room, and all masks dropped, and people were just very vulnerable. So this is how you create intimacy. No masks, or lots of masks. This is what Danone did, the food company. When it brought together 200 leaders for a strategy retreat, it asked them to wear silly costumes, feather boas, crazy hats, wigs, for the entire 3-day meeting. This is actually their CEO, Emmanuel Faber, on the left. And when they left with concrete decisions and a lot of enthusiasm. When I asked the woman on the right, who had designed this experience, why it had been so successful, she simply said, "Never underestimate the power of a ridiculous wig." Because wigs erase hierarchy, and hierarchy kills intimacy both ways for the CEO and the intern alike. Wigs allow us, in the disguise of the false, to show something true about ourselves. And wigs give us the faith that another world is possible. Online, our digital selves, our avatars and online personas, they actually allow us to assume fluid, non-binary identities. They allow us to step into the lives of others, especially those who are not like us, especially those who do not like us and perhaps even hate us. Now, what about intimacy between man and machine? Is that possible? So just a couple of weeks ago, a study came out in Sweden that actually said that human users were unable to switch off a tiny, cute little robot that had backed them not to be switched off. There's many other studies like that, and researchers take it as evidence that we do indeed form emotional attachment to machines, which is why robots are increasingly used in elderly care or mental health care. And perhaps it doesn't matter how intimacy is generated as long as we're feeling it. Perhaps it's the ultimate romantic task to project soul and spirit into the machines. How we treat the other, how we treat AI, says a lot about our moral imagination and civilization. And maybe we should assume that they possess a quality that is inherently romantic and inherently human, and that is to suffer a little. Now, business and suffering is an unlikely pair, but to learn about suffering, which really comes from passion, literally means passion, or the other way around, passion means literally suffering. We have to look at one group of humans that is really expert at it, and that is the football fan.
Ney, la penjarà Neymar, apareix Sergi Roberto!
Okay. All right. This goes on for 5 minutes, and honestly, I watch it once a day. It just makes me so happy, especially if you're a Barcelona fan, I have to say. But this is amazing, isn't it? There's this moment when he actually finally breaks down. We should probably still wait for that. But the reason I'm showing this to you is what is so interesting, besides the amount of passion that we're able to express in a football stadium, is the fact that for the true football fan, it's hard to compete with that. It doesn't even matter. I mean, it matters for the true football fan whether the team wins or loses, but what matters even more is how the team wins. And by the way, especially also how the team loses. Because true fandom is formed in defeat, right? It's the most painful defeats that form the folklore of fans. But that's very different in business, where we're all conditioned and operating to win, right? We're playing to win, and a winner takes all market society. I wish I had read one of these books. But I would argue that in the future, we are all going to be losing. We'll be losing the stability and certainty of traditional employment. We're going to lose control over our brands and organizations. We're going to lose authority. We're going to lose continuity. We're going to lose maybe a piece of our consistent identity. We're going to lose human agency in light of AI and automation. And we're going to enter and exit relationships much more frequently. We will have to reinvent ourselves much more often. We will have to travel between different identities, worlds, cultures, projects much more frequently. And we will need rites of passage. We will need rituals and practices to help us with these transitions. And here too, football can give us a lesson. And it's the story of Andres Iniesta from FC Barcelona, the legendary midfielder who lately played his last game for the club where he played for 22 years. And after his farewell game, he returned back to the stadium, the Camp Nou, sat down in the center circle of the pitch, and he sat there for an hour, quite reflecting on all the memories that the stadium held for him. He was literally in no man's land, in this liminal space. Liminal means threshold between his old life and his new life, an old chapter and a new chapter, and a gray zone. And it's a beautiful space because anything is possible, because nothing is certain. You know that other worlds, other truths are possible. We need more of these spaces in our organizations. We need more of these spaces in our society because things tend to get ugly when there's only one truth, when there's only one answer, when there are more answers than questions. Romantic organizations keep asking questions. And beautiful societies are not startups that offer us solutions. Beautiful societies suffer together a little. So these are the 3 rules of enchantment. Do the unnecessary, create intimacy, and suffer a little. And I do believe that they indicate a broader cultural shift away from the connected age that was in awe of data to a new romantic era where different qualities are becoming important. Deep connection instead of connectivity. Intimacy instead of scale. Big intuition instead of big data. Presence instead of precision. Vulnerability instead of control. Passion instead of liking. Suffering a little bit instead of user-friendliness. Beauty instead of efficiency. And I believe that we all can help build businesses that are like gardens and not machines, that value, again, what we cannot measure, that create products, services, and business models that are not only more useful, but also more beautiful. And if we combine the magic and the promise of exponential technology with those inherently human qualities, which for me are romantic traits, then perhaps we can not only be exponentially more productive, exponentially more efficient, but just a tiny little bit more human. And by the way, isn't that the European dream? With America and China pursuing rather aggressive nationalist agendas at this point? Building a beautiful society through romantic businesses, to me, that seems like a distinctively European project. Embracing the other is the challenge and the cure. And I'd like to conclude by going back and taking you back to the 2 others that I introduced at the beginning of my talk, the AI and the refugees. You know, the 37th move of AlphaGo, that beautiful move, it was stunningly beautiful, but it was played to win, not for the sake of beauty or romance. But for us humans, winning is secondary. Because ultimately, we are leaving our homes because otherwise we'd be ghosts in a shell. We can't help ourselves but reach out to the other. We are dying to connect with the other. And our signature move, our breakthrough move, is not the 37th move. It is always the first. And that's why I hope that my dad tomorrow will walk over the street, knock on the door, ring the bell, maybe bring some hummus, and say hello to his new neighbors. Thank you very much. Thank you.